Welcome to the Kung Fu Mama Show. Today we have Gina Heumann. She is a true Renaissance woman. All right, she is a wife, a mother, an architect, a designer, a professor, an author, a speaker, and she's an adoption advocate. And so she and her husband, Aaron, have adopted Landrey in 2001 from Guatemala. And they also went back for Maddox 3 years later, which is amazing. So can you please briefly share your personal journey about deciding to adopt?
Sure. Like most people, we started out the traditional route of having kids and it didn't work. So after several years of infertility treatments, we kind of finally came to the realization that we were supposed to adopt. Like thinking back on it, I really never wanted to be pregnant. I didn't want to breastfeed. I really did. I'm afraid of newborns. They're so fragile. So I kept saying like, oh, if people could just hand me a 6-month-old baby. Well, that's ended up what I got both times. So it in the end was the way it was supposed to happen for us.
That's amazing. So both of your sons are from Guatemala. Is there a reason why you chose Guatemala?
Well, at the time, international adoption was easier than domestic adoption here in the US. So we were looking at various countries that had adoption programs, and I really felt strongly that whatever country we chose, we adopt our child's culture. Mm-hmm. So I was president of Spanish Club in high school, and I've always been really drawn to the food and the culture and the music. So we just thought it was a good fit. And then my husband was a competitive soccer player. So he said, oh, they have skills in Guatemala. So maybe we'll get a kid who's a soccer player.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. So your husband is a professional soccer player.
Oh, no, not a professional, but he played competitively in college.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Great. So from your interests, and you guys just decided to go for Guatemala. Is the adoption process the same in different countries, or did you find that
it's changed so much since I got my kids, so I can't even really speak to what they do anymore. But our process was super quick. We got Landrey's referral right away and went to get him 6 months later. It had to go through like 2 different court processes in the country. Mm-hmm. So we had to wait until he was ready to be adopted. But we were able to send pictures and care packages and write to his foster family at the time. So we were able to do that with both kids. Maddox's foster mom never responded though, and we don't think she ever really read the letters we sent. So
how long was that when you guys decided to adopt until you actually had Landrey there in your home?
6 months.
6 months.
We filled out the paperwork. It's funny because the plan is that you go through all this paperwork and you get all the stuff together and then you wait for a referral. Well, because we wanted a boy from Guatemala and they had so many at the time, we literally faxed in our initial paperwork that said, yes, you're my agency. And they called me the same day and said, oh my God, we saw a perfect baby for you this morning. And I was like, wait, we're supposed to do all this work first. And she's like, oh, you're going to do the work now. So we raced to get paperwork done. I think we got most of our paperwork done within like 4 to 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. And that included like, a doctor visit to make sure you're in good enough health to be a parent. They had to look at our financial documents and make sure we could afford a baby. I'm like, most parents should have to go through this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And some people just have babies and they're not financially ready to do that.
Yeah, background checks, letters of reference from our friends, oh yes, we think they'll make good parents. How do they know?
And now that you're a parent, how do you feel? How is the process of becoming a parent and raising the children?
Looking back, I do it all over again because I just love the kids I got. So
amazing. So when did you realize? I heard that also that your son has reactive attachment disorder.
Yes. Yep, they call it RAD sometimes for short, but reactive attachment disorder is, it's caused by trauma in the first year or up to 3 years of life, but it's typically in that first year. And it's when that baby is forming attachments with the main caregiver. If something disrupts that in that first year, they learn to be mistrustful of adults, and they actually are rewired then to be in fight or flight mode most of the time. So it's very hard to get them to comply. It's very hard to reason with them because they're actually missing connections in the brain that should have been there with regular brain growth and development. But because they didn't get that connection in the beginning, and it affects all kids differently. Some kids are, a little bit more resilient in that area. Some kids are more prone to it. My son, we strongly feel, was neglected by his caregiver, his foster mom. We saw all the signs of neglect at the time, but looking back, like we didn't know what we were looking at the time. So we learned like 10 years later what the signs of neglect were. And then we were like, oh yeah, he had that. Oh, he had that too. So
okay.
So then we started putting the pieces together and kind of figured out where it all stemmed from.
Right. So when did you find out how old was he when you found out that he had this reactive attachment disorder?
Our official diagnosis didn't happen until he was 10, but I mean, we knew right away something was off. I mean, on the flight home from Guatemala, he screamed the entire 5 hours.
Oh my gosh.
As you can imagine, we were the most popular people on the plane. But yeah, and it was impossible to get him to sleep. I think the first time he slept through the night, he was 11 years old. He would get up in the middle of the night, even at like 8 or 9, and get up in the middle of the night and wander around the house or come in bed with us.
Wow.
So yeah, it was very tricky. And then he would have these horrific meltdown tantrums where over the smallest thing, over the smallest thing, he would like rage for about 2 to 4 hours. Yes. Major meltdowns, tantrums, rages. And they'd get so bad where he'd just flail his arms and hit us. At one point, I was driving my mom to the airport, and a song he liked was on the radio. And when it was over, he said, "Play it again, Mama." And I said, "Oh, I can't do that. That's not how the radio works." And I'm trying to explain this to a 2-year-old in the back seat, and he's not having it. He's like, "Play my song again." And he turns into this like exorcist child, his head spinning around. It takes off his shoe and flings it at me, hits me in the head as I'm driving down the highway.
Wow.
His other shoe comes flying up on the dashboard. So like he got really angry over just the tiniest things. And that tantrum lasted about 4 hours. It went the whole way I went to the airport, the whole way back, and then for hours once we got home.
Oh my goodness. That is such a struggle. And it was like that for everything.
Years.
Like any small things could just trigger.
And when he got older and larger, his anger got more severe and he got bigger and stronger. So he was scary, and he would punch holes in the walls or throw lamps across the room. And, we broke a lot of electronics.
Wow. How did you deal with that? Did it affect your family dynamic or your marriage?
Yes, I would say we're all recovering from trauma now. It just wasn't a normal way to grow up. And, my son wasn't always like this. It was just on occasion, or, if the wrong thing happened and you could never predict it. So not most of the time, but a lot of the time we had good times together too. So it wasn't just awful, but when it was, when it got bigger and stronger, it got more and more scary. There was a time that he punched me in the head while I was asleep, and then told me it was because I took away his video games. And I'm like, all parents do that if you get in trouble. But mine just couldn't take no for an answer. So he was still angry 9 hours later. And after that, I started sleeping with one eye open because I was afraid of what he might do.
Right. Oh my goodness. And what about you and your husband? Did you guys?
I have the greatest husband in the world. We've been best friends all along, and he's pretty go with the flow. So I do a lot of research, and then I come back and I say, okay, this is what I think we have. This is what I think we should try. And he's usually pretty good to go with it. So he's willing to try whatever. And thank God, because we put a lot of time and money into it. And now our son is doing great. So he's no longer violent. He's no longer angry. He still deals with a little bit anxiety and depression, but don't we all? So he's much more a regular person. I don't fear for his future anymore. I don't think he's going to end up in jail. I think he's going to be a wonderful, productive human being. He actually wants to be a rad therapist now because of how much it's helped him and how he wants to help others. So he's pretty
that's
cool.
amazing. That is amazing. What about your other son? How has it affected him?
You know, I'm learning this term glass children because he was so easy and so mellow that we kind of saw through him, you know, like we didn't see how much trauma he was actually enduring. And he was easygoing and he was compliant. And he was kind of the mediator too. When my son would have one of his rages, he would go in and kind of talk him down from it. And he might want to be a therapist someday as well. So, but he's, you know, sometimes he'd have to hold him down because he was trying to hurt me, or it got really scary sometimes. So I think that he's now dealing with some trauma now that it's all over. And I'm trying to get him some neurofeedback now to get him back to normal.
How old are your children now?
17 and 20.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my 20-year-old just moved out a couple of weeks ago to his own apartment. So
oh, how was that?
that was hard. And especially because he's really social and he has like 6 best friends that have the code to our front door. So there was constantly like guys coming in and out of our house. I knew them all, but you know, now they're all gone because they're all down at his apartment.
Oh my gosh. Separation. But yeah, so back to Rad. What are some signs that is there any signs you would be able to tell when you're actually adopting, you know, children that you would be able to?
Yes. And when they're babies, they don't make eye contact like normal babies do, because babies connect and attach to their caregivers with eye contact and tone of voice and, you know, touching. And so our son was very reactive to touch. So when we would try to snuggle with him, he would arch his back and try to wiggle away. He kind of, when he got in these rages, I call them rad eyes. He looked like his eyes were like dark black, like in a horror movie.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So you could kind of see from the look on his face if there was an upcoming episode.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you were adopting, obviously you didn't know these things. And then you didn't get diagnosed until 10 years later?
Yes. I went to the pediatrician. I was begging her. I'm like, something is off with this child. And she kept saying, oh, no, it's just the terrible twos. Oh, you know, sometimes the terrible twos last into the threes. And I kept going, no, I had a kid go through terrible twos. This is way different.
Yeah.
So it took a while to get people to help me. And I think at like 3.5, she finally said, okay, I'll let you go see the child psychologist in our network. And that guy looked at him for about 3 minutes and handed me some ADD pills and said, okay, you're good.
Oh, wow.
We didn't know any better. So we thought, okay, well, maybe this is what we have. So, and then, you know, it turned into the ADD pills actually make the mood disorder worse. So the ADD pills made him angrier. And then, every time they give you a drug like that, they say, oh, well, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to build up in your system. So we have to give it some time. And then if it's not working, now we have to wean off of that one. Now we have to wean on to a new one. And, it was just kind of like a roller coaster of medications. And, we trusted the doctors. I'm not the type to want to medicate my child, but, when they tell me this is what you need to do, I was like, well, you're the experts. Okay. So
exactly. So how many different treatments did you go through before actually finding the right treatment?
Quite a few. When he was little, we did like play therapy, and we tried family therapy as a group. Then we did in-home therapy at one point, which is where like somebody comes in your house like the super nanny and just like follows you around and watches you parent. It's very awkward and uncomfortable.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. We tried, oh my God, any kind of therapy you can think of. We tried neurofeedback when he was little. It's improved dramatically in the last 15 years. So we did it again recently, and I cannot say enough good things about it. But at the time, I don't think we gave it enough treatments. So that didn't work for him. We tried the brain balance program, which is something that tries to, increase the left or right side of the brain, whichever one's weakest. We did that twice. That was like $5,000 a pop. So
wow. Oh my gosh.
None of these things were cheap or free, but we were so desperate, and we're like, all right, we'll try anything we can get our hands on. We're going to try it. So, we went into debt.
Oh my gosh. And so when was that? Who was that person, or how did you find out, that it was actually rad in the end?
So we got the diagnosis when he was about 10, and it was actually from an intern. He was working for our therapy group that was doing like group therapy for kids in elementary school. And he was 24. He was in grad school for his psychology degree. He was a veteran, and my son was obsessed with the Army at the time. So he was also Hispanic. So my son thought he was the greatest thing in the world. So they did these little mini therapy sessions where they would like walk up to McDonald's and get an ice cream cone, or they'd walk to the park and play on the swings and do therapy. And he was the one that finally said to me, he goes, have you ever heard of reactive attachment disorder? And I said, no. And he said, here's some articles I want you to read. And I read all those articles, and I was like, oh yes, this is it. Like, I'd never heard of it before. And then we knew we had it. We couldn't find anybody to help us. But my son eventually had to go to the police because he assaulted a teacher. And they sent him to the juvenile assessment center at the police station, and they did a whole thorough assessment of him and came back and said, hey, guess what? He has reactive attachment disorder. And I said, yeah, no kidding. What do I do about it? And of course they said, oh, we have a list of therapists. I'm like, do you know how much therapy I've tried? And so I finally ran into a girl that said, you know what? I know I have a friend who's an intern for a guy up in Evergreen who's a world-renowned reactive attachment disorder specialist. Do you want his number? And so I said, yes. And I called him the next day, and he ended up doing intensive family therapy for us, which was 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. 4 therapists and all 4 of us. So it was really intense, and we were doing all kinds of activities. And that I know was the catalyst, because after that, I mean, it wasn't like a miracle, like, oh, we went for 2 weeks and now everything's beautiful. But it definitely improved over the next year. And then one day we realized that we couldn't remember his last rage incident. And we were like, wow, I think he's getting better. So from there, he's just continued to improve.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine. Can you tell us a little bit more about this intensive therapy? 4 therapists and 4 hours a day for 5 days a week. That is insane.
Yeah. And sometimes my kids were in the other room doing, art therapy or word association. Sometimes my husband and I were digging into our pasts and finding out that we had our own childhood trauma. I had my own childhood trauma that was never dealt with, that triggers. So when he's doing something, it triggers me from my past. Wow. And so I had to realize and get over all of that kind of first. Then we also did a bunch of things together. And one of the things that was so cool was they had him, he's 12 years old at the time, and he's laying on my lap. And I'm holding him like a baby. So it's kind of awkward. But in that time, he had a flip chart. The therapist had a flip chart, and he said, Maddox, let's talk about, so he was doing all the work. Let's talk about how babies bond with their caregivers. Or no, first he said, let's talk about what babies need. And so we made a list of they need their diapers changed, they need a bottle, they need a place to sleep, and things like that. And then he said, okay, next page. Let's go to how do babies bond with their caregivers? So for that one, we talked about eye contact and tone of voice and snuggling and kisses and, all the things you want to do with a little squishy baby. And he said, okay. And then we talked about his birth mom, and we talked about his foster mom. And he went back to those flip charts, and he said, you know what? Technically, your foster mom did her job. She kept you alive. She did all the things on this page. She gave you food occasionally. You had a place to sleep, and you got your diapers changed sometimes. She kept you alive. And then he flipped to the second page. He said, but she didn't do any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And this is why you don't trust people. And you have to be in control all the time. And you don't like people telling you no or telling you what to do. And that's why. And so it seemed like once he understood that, it made a big difference. But so throughout this whole therapy, and this is about 45 minutes to an hour or whatever. And then the therapists all say, okay, well, we're going to get up and leave. And here's what we want you to do. Just sit here and be there for each other. You don't have to talk. Don't talk about what we just did. I don't want you to talk at all. Just sit here and be there for each other. And when you're ready, I'll be outside. Sorry, my dog. He said, when you're ready, I'll be outside the door. And I kind of glanced at my husband. I'm like, we've been sitting here for 45 minutes. What are we supposed to do here? Soon as the door closed, my son started crying, and I've never seen him cry that hard in his whole life. He cried and cried and cried for 20 minutes. And towards the end, he started reaching for me and hugging me. And it was just the coolest thing ever.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing.
So that's was incredible. Part one. And then part two, he had to pick a teddy bear. The next day, he had to pick a teddy bear off this giant wall of teddy bears. And that became him as a baby. So his name as a baby was Juan Pablo. So this was baby Juan Pablo. And he had to tell baby Juan Pablo the story of his birth mom and his foster mom and coming to America and how scared he must have felt. And the whole time, like they're coaching him. And the whole time they kept saying, this is going to be really hard on him. So, you might have to snuggle him and, give him some hugs and some love because he didn't get that at the time. And so I think that kind of helped him process all of that. And, he kind of gave himself what he was missing as a baby. So those two things I say were like miracles. And then we also had a different school that was a therapeutic school environment. So real small class sizes. They did yoga and meditation, and they had a therapy dog. And so it was a really good place for him. Mm-hmm. And I think we call it the magic triangle. So home, we had therapy, then we had therapists, and then we had school, and everybody was on the same page. So
including the dog.
Yeah, sorry about the dogs.
Oh my gosh. That's so amazing. And it's kind of incredible also. How did you feel about I know you had so many therapies, but was this the first therapy that you guys had to look into your own lives and your own personal journey?
And that made such a difference for all of us, because I think we all then understood each other better, and where we were all coming from. It was just amazing. It was a really great, I mean, it was hard, but it was a really good experience in the end.
I feel like a lot of families don't have that. I mean, obviously, and everything's fine. You wouldn't think to do any therapy. And I'm sure that almost everyone has some sort of trauma or something that they've dealt with in their past, and they didn't even know that it caused trauma, or they didn't, right? Because you didn't know about these things until you had to do the treatment with the therapist, right?
Exactly. And the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, we should all be learning more about our past and how trauma affects us. And there's a really good book out right now by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. It's called What Happened to You. If you get a chance, it's the greatest book, because it explains like why people are the way they are. And it's so fascinating, because, when you see somebody, screaming at somebody in a restaurant, you can go back to like, I wonder what kind of trauma, I wonder what happened to them to make them so angry.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that would be a great book for me to read, because I'm also an actress. So you also try to dig into, what is the experience of that character.
Exactly. Yeah, you should read it. It's really good. I actually did the audiobook, so it was like having Oprah in my kitchen.
Amazing. Technology these days, right?
Right. And that's my dream, is to have Oprah in my kitchen someday, or to meet her someday.
Amazing. Well, you've already started on your way. You have a book called Love Never Quits.
Love Never Quits. Yep. It is kind of the story of our journey in more detail. And it's a quick read. I did the Audible version, and it only took me I think it was like 4.5 hours. So it's pretty short. But wow. Yeah. And reactive attachment disorder, as horrific as it is, there's still some funny stories in there too. So it's not just a horrible book.
I'm sure it's not horrible. I mean,
my goal was for it to be inspirational. So that's the whole goal of it. So
no, you are inspirational. I mean, just hearing about how long you spent, I guess, in the dark about this disorder. And I think you can help so many people out there.
And I'm hoping that no other mother has to struggle the way I did. I don't want anybody to feel as alone as I did and as clueless as I was. I want to be there for other moms. So
that's amazing. So would you like to tell us, if you don't mind, a funny story?
Funny story. Oh my gosh, that's hard off the top of my head. But oh gosh. Well, I'll tell you, the day that the lightning bolt hit me and that I knew I had to do this business. So I'm doing a business now called Trauma Drama University. And it came out of one of those days when my son was being the absolute worst he could possibly be. And I was laying on the floor crying in my closet. This is not a funny story, but and I just was praying to God or the universe or whoever would listen, please, if I can get to the other side of this, I promise I'm going to help other people. And so like a lightning bolt, I was like, this is what I'm meant to do. So I eventually wrote my book when we got to the other side. Someone reminded me that I needed to help other people. So I wrote my book, and then I did my TED Talk about a year later, and that was March 7th, 2020. So like the week after the entire world shut down for COVID. So
oh my God.
So I just barely squeaked it in, but then I spent a year thinking how that's not enough. I don't want to just do a TED Talk. I don't want to just write my book, because not everybody's going to read the book and not everybody's going to do this, but I need to reach more people somehow. So I put this business together to educate and support other parents, just so that like when they're having a horrible day and they're just losing their mind, they can get on our private discussion board. I'm going to have tips for how to stay calm when your kid is going nuts. And we're going to have some self-care activities. We're going to have lots of education. And then I'm going to have a monthly Zoom session with industry experts. So you can learn about, the IEP process if you're, using that in school for special accommodations, or what is neurofeedback and how can that heal the brain? So something like that too. So we're going to have a lot of fun things over the next year.
Amazing. That sounds like such an amazing resource, and I'm glad that you're building it.
And it's a university because I'm a professor. So,
Oh.
So you'll get a certificate at the end. And then if you want to stay and be part of the community, I'm going to do like a monthly subscription. But the initial program is a year.
Oh, amazing. Okay. Yeah. And then some quick tips to manage stress for our listeners.
Okay. Take a brisk walk, go out in sunshine. Walk away and take some deep breaths. What else? Have a glass of wine, just a glass, because I could tell you with a rad kid, you could easily drink a box a night.
Oh, God.
I don't know, take a bath. Oh, dance party. That's my favorite one, because when you're dancing or singing, you're never upset.
There was something one of my other podcast guests said that I thought I loved, is that when you're angry or you're going to have a fight, just smile. Like literally in the middle of your fight, just smile, because biologically that smile actually emits like sort of like a happiness chemical, so that you're like forced to calm yourself down. You're forced to be happier. Even though you're really angry and you smiled, it will help to dissipate some of that anger.
When I was in high school, I did telemarketing, and they always told us to smile when you're reading the script, because people can tell that you're smiling. And it's really true. Like if you're grumpy, people can tell.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for sharing all this wonderful information. It was really inspiring.
Thank you for having me.
And how can our listeners find you?
I'm gonna send you all my links, but the book is Love Never Quits by Gina Heumann. It's Heumann. It's on Amazon. Or just look up traumadramauniversity.com. Cool. That's all the information about my program, and you can email me there.
Amazing. All right. And don't forget to follow at Kung Fu Mama Show, Facebook, IG, and follow our YouTube channel at Starring Sarah Chang. So thank you so much. It was amazing to have you today.
Thank you.